The Fisherman and His Soul by Oscar Wilde. Part 7. When they are glad, they go to the bird sellers and buy of them a caged bird, and set it free that their joy may be greater. And when they are sad, they scourge themselves with thorns that their sorrow may not grow less. One evening I met some negroes carrying a heavy palanquin through the bazaar. It was made of gilded bamboo, and the poles were of vermilion lacquer studded with brass peacocks. Across the windows hung thin linen embroidered with beetles' wings and with tiny seed pearls. And as it passed by a pale-faced Circassian looking out, he smiled at me. I followed behind, and the negroes hurried their steps and scowled. But I did not care. I felt a great curiosity come over me. At last they stopped at a square white house. There were no windows to it, only a little door like the door of a tomb. They sat down to the palanquin and knocked 3 times with a copper hammer. An Armenian in a kaftan of green leather peered through the wicket, and when he saw them he opened and spread a carpet on the ground, and the woman stepped out. As she went in, she turned round and smiled at me again. I had never seen anyone so pale. When the moon rose, I returned to the same place and sought for the house, but it was no longer there. When I saw that, I knew who the woman was, and therefore she had smiled at me. Certainly thou shouldst have come with me. On the feast of the new moon, the young emperor came forth from his palace and went into the mosque to pray. His hair and beard were dyed with rose leaves, and his cheeks were powdered with a fine gold dust. The palms of his feet and hands were yellow with saffron. At sunrise he went forth from his palace in a robe of silver, and at sunset he returned to it again in a robe of gold. When the emperor saw me, he raised his painted eyebrows and stopped. I stood quite still and made him no obeisance. The people marveled, pay no heed to them, and went and sat with the sellers of the strange gods, who by reason of their craft are abominated. When I told them what I had done, each of them gave me a god and prayed me to leave them. That night, as I lay on a cushion in the tea-house that is in the street of Pomegranates, the guards of the emperor entered and led me to the palace. As I went in, they closed each door behind me and put a chain across it. Inside was a great court with an arcade running all around. The walls were of white alabaster, set here and there with blue and green tiles. The pillars were of green marble, and the pavement of a kind of peach blossom marble. I had never seen anything like it before. As I passed across the court, 2 veiled women looked down from a balcony and cursed me. The guards hastened on, and the butts of the lances rang upon the polished floor. They opened a gate of wrought ivory, and I found myself in a watered garden of 7 terraces. It was planted with tulip cups and moonflowers and silver-studded aloes. Like a slim reed of crystal, a fountain hung in the dusky air. The cypress trees were like burnt-out torches. From one of them a nightingale was singing. At the end of the garden stood a little pavilion. As we approached it, 2 eunuchs came out to meet us. Their fat bodies swayed as they walked, and they glanced curiously at me with their yellow-lidded eyes. One of them drew aside the captain of the guard, and in a low voice whispered to him. The other kept munching scented pastilles, which he took with an affected gesture out of an oval box of lilac enamel. After a few moments, the captain of the guard dismissed the soldiers. They went back to the palace, the eunuchs following slowly behind and plucking the sweet mulberries from the trees as they passed. Once the elder of the 2 turned round and smiled at me with an evil smile. Then the captain of the guard motioned me towards the entrance of the pavilion. I walked on without trembling, and drawing the heavy curtain aside, I entered in. The emperor was stretched dyed lion skins, and a girfalon perched upon his wrist. Behind him stood a brass-turbaned Nubian, naked down to his waist, and with heavy earrings in its split ears. On a table by the side of the couch lay a mighty scimitar of steel. When the emperor saw me, he frowned and said to me, "What is thy name? Knowest thou not that I am emperor of this city?" But I made him no answer. He pointed with his finger at the scimitar, and the Nubians seized it, and rushing forward, struck at me with great violence. The blade whizzed through me, and he did me no harm. The man fell sprawling on the floor, and when he rose up, his teeth chattered with terror, and he hid himself behind the couch. The emperor leapt to his feet, and taking a lance from a stand of arms, he threw it at me. I caught it in its flight and brake the shaft into 2 pieces. He shot at me with an arrow, but I held up my arms, and it stopped in midair. Then he drew a dagger from a belt of white leather and stabbed the Nubian in the throat, lest the slave should tell of his dishonor. The man writhed like a trampled snake, and a red foam bubbled from his lips. As soon as he was dead, the emperor turned to me, and when he had wiped away the bright sweat from his brow with a little napkin of purf red and purple silk, he said to me, "Art thou a prophet, that I may not harm thee, or the son of a prophet, that I can do thee no hurt? I pray thee, leave my city tonight, for while thou art in it, I am no longer its lord." And I answered him, "I will go for half of thy treasure. Give me half of thy treasure, and I will go away." He took me by the hand and led me out into the garden. When the captain of the guard saw me, he wondered. When the eunuchs saw me, their knees shook, and they fell upon the ground in fear. There is a chamber in the palace that has 8 walls of red porphyry, and a brass sealed ceiling hung with lamps. The emperor touched one of the walls, and it opened, and we passed down a corridor that was lit with many torches. In niches upon each side stood great wine jars, filled to the brim with silver pieces. When we reached the center of the corridor, the emperor spake the word that may not be spoken, and a granite door swung back on a secret spring, and he put his hand before his face, lest his eyes should be dazzled. Thou couldst not believe how marvelous a place it was. There were huge tortoise shells full of pearls, and hollowed moonstones of great size piled up with red rubies. The gold was stored in coffers of elephant hide, and the gold dust in leather bottles. There were opals and sapphires, the former in cups of crystal, and the latter in cups of jade.